Welcome to The Classical Mind, a podcast about the great books in the Western canon. We're your hosts. I'm Father Wesley Walker.
And I remain Dr. Junius Johnson.
Excellent. Good to see you, Junius. Glad you have remained. How are you doing?
Doing fine. Fighting a little bit of a cold, but that's just life. And getting lots done here in the summer and the waning days of the summer already.
I know, it's gone crazy. I feel like that always happens this time of year. That kind of last summer cold kind of makes its go rounds, and it's not a fun thing to deal with.
Yeah, and it also kind of feels like
cool.
once you hit Midsummer's Day, it's the Feast of St. John. It feels like summer accelerates from there, and it's just like straight into the back to school slouch.
That's right. Well, good. Well, today we are going to be talking about the Aeneid by Virgil, and I'm excited about this conversation for a number of reasons. I think it's just an excellent book, and it'll be fun to talk through it with you. It also paves the way for some discussions we're going to be having in the next season of the show, which we still haven't formally released yet, but maybe we'll drop some nice Easter eggs for people about what to expect in the next season as we go through this. But maybe to start out, we could talk kind of our normal opening question, which is when do you remember experiencing this text for the first time, encountering this text?
I was definitely in college. I had C.S. Lewis had mentioned it in something probably several times. And I thought, what is this thing? I'm going to go read this and see what he's talking about. So I checked it out from the library. This is probably freshman year of college. And I read it. And I don't remember if I had read the Odyssey by then. I'm sure I had not read the Iliad yet. But I hadn't read lots of epic poetry by that point. And so it was a challenge for me that first time through, because I was still in the process of discovering, to my great surprise, that all the great works of literature are poetry. My experience had led me to expect them all to be novels. I didn't know much about long form poetry. So it was one of the first epic poems that I ever read.
Wow, that's cool. And listeners, just so that you are clear, that was not a required reading in any course that you had. You just read that someone else was talking about it and you just picked it up when you were an undergrad.
That's right.
That's the right. Junius method, I'm pretty sure, is from what I gather and talking to you, is that you do all the reading kind of front loaded, and then you just pick up the book, the text, the extra text, right, that get talked about a lot.
That's right.
It's a good strategy.
I backed my way into a lot of erudition.
I love it. I think for me, I encountered this text when I was in high school for the first time. Was not familiar with it very much, but I took a class, I think my senior year, on world literature, ancient literature, and so we read the Iliad, the Odyssey, and then we read the Aeneid. And I remember for years kind of not having the highest view of the Aeneid, because I saw it as sort of a regurgitation of the Iliad and the Odyssey, which in some ways, I mean, it intentionally is. Mm-hmm. But I think this read through, I read it another time when I taught through it. And that was probably 2015. And then reading it this time, I think I've actually appreciated it the most out of any of the reads throughs that I've given it in the past. So I was glad to revisit the text.
Yeah, it is. It is a very good. It is an intentional recapitulation, right? And so just to sort of name the elephant in the room, the first 6 books are a recapitulation of the Odyssey, and the second 6 books are a recapitulation of the Iliad. And so he sort of inverts Homer and goes the other direction. Another random biographical side note: when I did come to the Iliad, I was surprised that it had 24 books, because I had learned from Virgil and Milton and whatnot that epics should have 12. And so I was really shocked to find that Homer had 24.
Yeah. Well, he's twice as good as everybody else, so. So, yeah, you're right. The books are pretty evenly divided between harkening back to the Odyssey, harkening back to the Iliad. The story picks up kind of mid-journey, but the idea is that the Aeneas and his band of folks are refugees from the Trojan War. They're the Trojans who survived the Trojan horse invasion, and so they end up sailing around, and they kind of have a promised land home, but they have to get there, and they go through many different twists and turns in order to get there. Hera, Juno, the goddess, is not a big fan of theirs, and so she, at every kind of point, tries to make their lives a little bit more difficult. Aeneas has to overcome a number of obstacles, including his own self, in order to get there. And then when they finally get there, of course, there is a war that they have to fight and win in order to get the land that was promised to them.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's a very interesting story, very similar, very resonant with things that you would be familiar with if you had read the Odyssey and the Iliad. The main difference, though, is the way that the Trojans are depicted, at least in my read. I mean, we've talked about this when we did the Iliad. Are you a Hector guy or an Achilles guy? And it's very debatable. I mean, I think, you were Achilles guy, I'm a Hector guy. But then you read this and it's like, well, there is really no alternative. You're just an Aeneas guy. He's a good guy. Right. You're
there are no guys out there.
Yeah, exactly. And so in that way, it's a little bit different. And perhaps we could talk for a minute about the sort of political purpose behind the Aeneid, which is not present in the Iliad and the Odyssey, as to why that is.
Yeah. And Aeneas really is Achilles and Hector rolled into one. He has the virtues of each. And so that's, in a sense, Virgil saying, look, you don't have to choose because our guy is both halves. He can do everything well that either one of them did well, and that's very nice. I think it is important to talk about the political aspect of it. I'm just sort of tracing a couple of thoughts in my mind. I think maybe before we say that, though, let's touch on this, which is the fact that the Romans are identifying themselves as descendants of and inheritors of the Trojan mantle. So they would say they are Trojans. They were left of Troy. They married with the Latins and became the Romans, and therefore the sort of mantle of Trojan authority migrates to Rome, and so when Rome therefore conquers Greece later on, that's long due payback, and it's restoring the rightful order of things. The Romans are not unique in tracing their national origins back to the Trojans. The Britons, of course, famously traced themselves back to Troy, and there was a Brutus who was either a grandson or a great grandson, depending on which historian you ask, of Aeneas, who was exiled for killing his father and wound up landing on the island of Britain, and it's called Britain after his name, Brutus. And so there's the sense that the Celts in England are the descendants of the Trojans. And there's a kind of there's an interesting linguistic piece of evidence to support that, because those Britons are Celts, and the Greek word for Celt is Galatoi. And Galatoi is like, Galatia over in Asia Minor. So there is a potentially, some people say that it's just a coincidence. They're not related words, but there is a sense in which it's possible that there is linguistic evidence that these peoples in Britain did originate in the Trojan region. Whatever the case is there, the Norsemen also traced their history back to the Trojans. They explicitly claim that Odin was Priam. And so the Asgardian gods were the Trojan court. And then they were, again, refugees, different set of refugees from Troy. And it's really fascinating that you have to go once Greece falls, you have to go all the way to the Renaissance before you find anybody else in Europe who is identifying with the Greeks in the Trojan War. Everybody else is identifying with the Trojans. And, through the Norsemen, you get the Normans, who then wind up coming into England and conquering those guys. You get all of the Angles and Saxons. You get the Franks and the continental Saxons. Basically everybody except for the Spanish are all looking backwards to Troy through the Norse myths, while the Spanish are looking backwards to Troy through the Roman myths. So it's just really fascinating that as much as I think our culture identifies with Greece much more than with Troy. And we talk very easily about Greco-Roman as being this thing because the Romans, of course, stole all of the Greek mythology and whatnot. But the reality is that the Romans didn't see it that way. They saw themselves starkly differentiated from the Greeks, and the Greeks were kind of their ancient enemy, even older than Carthage. So it's fascinating historical corrections. We look backwards to recognize that to read this text right, and really to read all texts up to the Renaissance right, we have to look at Troy as the good guys. and as the victims who are, unfairly put upon by Greece, whereas we're used to thinking of Greece as the victims because of the theft of Helen.
Right. The Trojans would have won if it weren't for the sort of dirty trick. Is kind of the way you get the feeling you get about their take on the conflict.
Yeah, that's right.
Interesting. So then Virgil is writing this text as a way of kind of bolstering that Roman identity in light of the reign of Caesar Augustus, right?
That's right.
So you get moments of real Roman nationalism that shine through the text. I mean, two things that sort of stood out to me on this read, just kind of revisiting everything, is that the whole incident with Dido is a sort of ideological explanation of why the Romans and the Carthaginians hate each other. So all of the sort of Punic War stuff, you kind of understand because of this ancient relationship that impacts even now. And when he goes to the underworld, when Aeneas goes to the underworld, he encounters her, and her wrath burns forever against him, or something is what it said. And so you can kind of see that play out in the history of the relationship between those two powers. And the other way that shines through during that trip to the underworld, especially, is when he sees all the souls that were that deserve a second chance from the fates, and his father kind of walks him through each one as some great Roman figure in the Hall of Fame, but they haven't lived yet. So Aeneas gets a foreshadow of what is going to happen through this tour of, and this is so-and-so, and this is so. And you'd I mean, I'm sure our readers, even if you're not very familiar with Roman history, you would recognize a good number of the names: the Scipios, Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus. All these folks are there in the underworld, and so Aeneas gets a little glimpse at what will happen as a result.
Yeah, that's right. And the Punic Wars were a huge deal, and it won't do to underestimate this. I mean, the Punic Wars were to Rome what the Trojan War was to Greece. That is to say, they were global scale conflicts for cultural dominance of the Mediterranean. The Trojan War is about, will Europe or Asia dominate the Mediterranean, and Europe wins barely. It's so close that Greece never stopped telling the story, right? And the Punic Wars are about, will Europe or Africa dominate the Mediterranean? And Europe wins again, just barely, and they never stop telling the story. Famously, Cato was known for underscoring that Carthage, there's never going to be peace as long as there was a Carthage. And this is what we're seeing and set up in the Aeneid is it's futile to think that there could be a reconciliation between Rome and Carthage because Dido's never going to forget. And in fact, Juno's never going to forget. And so Cato would finish every speech he made with Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. And it's kind of like, I like to imagine it almost kind of flippantly in the same way that somebody might say, like, peace out these days, whatever he's talking about, and that's why we need better sewers in Rome. Thank you very much. I'm Cato. Carthage must be destroyed. But just harping on it until we get it done, because it's going to be an eternal thorn in Rome's side.
I used to have a poster in my classroom of, do you remember Salt Bay, the chef? He would sprinkle salt like this, but it said Carthago delenda est, and he was wearing like a Roman helmet, and he's sprinkling salt on the burning fields of Carthage.
Nice. And so we have to read that not just into the Dido Aeneas thing, but this is the reason Juno was against the Trojans from the beginning. All of their trouble is she knows that Aeneas is going to go and found Rome, and Rome is going to claim the imperium that she would like Carthage to have. And if it weren't for Rome, Carthage would have had that imperium. And so she's fighting not just against Aeneas, but against the entire sweep of world history. She's fighting against what Virgil is portraying as the manifest destiny of Rome in the most literal sense, a strong divine mandate to subdue the world and bring it peace and law. I think another thing that we have to keep in mind here is Rome's own recent history before Virgil's writing under Emperor Augustus. Rome had been usually we say tyranny. They were king/tyrants before the Republic, and some of them were decent, were good, but the last one was not. And he had to be put down, And the family that put him down, by the way, the Junius Brutus family. Thank you very much. And Junius, people always ask me, where does the name come from? Originally, it indicates that the family is devoted to the service of Juno. And so that bit at the end of the poem about how Rome will hold Juno above the other gods, the Junius family feels like they are the fulfillers of that. And so here we are defending. It's kind of it's a touchy point to put in there, given the way Augustus would have felt about the Junii, because the Junii then come back and kill Caesar at the end, Marcus and Decimus Junius Brutus, who are, I think, uncle and nephew. Marcus being the younger. So when the tyranny ends, the Republic comes into being, and the Republic is this really cool time, and it's a lot of what people look back on. It's like, oh, these are the great years of Rome, and it was kind of democratic. It was in no way, but right. More so than as an empire anyway. And Caesar was emerged as the great threat to the Republic because so much power was concentrated in him between the military and the plebeian support. He really assiduously cultivated the support of the plebeians, as we talked about. Well, we saw this when we read Julius Caesar together. So listeners, you can go back and check out that episode. So killing Caesar was supposed to save the Republic and head off a return to tyranny. But what actually happened was it led to the triumvirate, and the triumvirate then led to the struggle between Mark Antony and Octavius. Octavius wins, is crowned emperor, becomes Caesar Augustus, and that's the end of the Republic. And the Republic will never come back again. Rome will be an empire for the rest of its history. So that's where Virgil's writing, where we've just had this massive change in governance that is very ambiguous in the eyes of Romans who know their history, which is the entire educated class. It seems like we're going backwards. What do we think about all this? How should we look at this? And so what Virgil does here is provide legitimacy, not just for Augustus's reign specifically, but for the whole sweep of Roman history towards being an empire, and why it makes sense, and really kind of gives them a national myth they can latch onto that helps them understand, no, we're still who we are, and even in some ways we're more truly who we've always been than ever before, even more so than under the Republic, because this empire enables us to do the mandate of spreading peace and law much more effectively. And the Pax Romana begins under Caesar Augustus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The Pax Romana is a myth, right? It's a story that they tell themselves. It's like there was no fighting. I mean, ask everybody else. There's lots of fighting during the Pax Romana. But the story that we have brought peace to the world, a lot of the fuel for that comes from this text.
Yeah. Yeah. For that reason, too, I think you do get, and this is a conversation we had, I think, during the Iliad, that theme of divine intervention versus fate kind of plays a lot into it. Because again, you get the idea that the Trojans were kind of cheated out of their homes through, mischievous divine intervention. And then
that man, Ulysses,
and that man.
Person.
That's right. But then here you have kind of, as the story nears an end, Jupiter has to say, we're going to let fate decide this. No more intervention, no more divine intervention. And that's when the Trojans pull out, barely, but they still pull it out because, okay, without this kind of trickery, without the tables being turned, without the finger on the scale, we are superior.
Yeah, that is fascinating. He tried to do that in the Iliad, and the other gods wouldn't leave it alone, and they kept going down there and messing with things. But of course, he wasn't leaving it to fate. He was just saying, "Leave me alone, so I can do things the way I want to do them. I have to build Hector up for Achilles." And the same thing's happening here. He says, "Let us leave it to fate," but he's already decreed, eternally, unchangeably, that they will found Rome, and Rome will go on to ground the world. So he's talking a little bit out of both sides of his mouth there, because I think he knows what fate is. But there is that sense in which I think you're right to point to. There's a Roman desire to say, yes, we did this with the blessing of the gods on the one hand, because they're a very religious people, but on the other hand, it's also, if all the gods, if you bracket divine agency, we still pulled it out. We were able to do it. Right. And the other thing to keep in mind is the people they conquer here, this is not a repeat of the Troy situation. That won't happen until Carthage. The people they conquer become them. So as you're watching the war between Turnus's forces and Aeneas's forces, these are all ancestors of the Romans, and they're going to get integrated into that one people. So the fact that it was so close and that the Trojans barely won shows how strong the Italian stock is, which means, hey, on both sides, if you will, my mother's and my father's side, to use an analogy, I'm amazing. And so look how strong our might is when you combine those two bloodlines.
On the divine agency question, I think one of the interesting things here, because in the previous books, you almost do get the sense that they are entirely separate things, right? There's fate, and then there's the gods. And we talked about that, how sometimes you read, different poets will kind of depict Zeus as being in charge of the fates, and other times fate is kind of independent of him. But here throughout, it does seem like, from the very beginning, I think it's all the way in book 3, Jupiter or Jove says, "Son of the goddess, surely proof is clear. The highest sanctions shine upon your voyage. So the kings and gods, this is Apollo saying it to Aeneas, but he says, so the king of the gods has sorted out your fate. So rolls your life as the world rolls through its changes. Now, few out of many truths I will reveal to you, so you can cross the welcoming sea more safely, more secure in a Latian harbor." So in other words, the fates there and Jove are kind of operating in tandem, or fate is kind of a mechanism of Jove. He even says the fates have forbidden Helenus to know the rest. Saturnian Juno says, "I may not speak a word." So like there's this kind of subjugation to Jove that's occurring through that whole section. And so it seems a little more unified. It almost seems a little more in line with someone like a Boethius, who sees providence, the sort of ordering of things, as still God's, an expression of God's will, even though it's not interference the way that it's kind of easy to conceptualize, especially with pagan gods. They don't really plan, they interfere. But Jove doesn't seem to have much by way of interference here. It's his plan, and it's what gets executed.
I agree. That's how I read that passage as well. That's that destiny is something that Jove is handing out. He's dealing out what's going to happen, and that's definitely taking a stand on that ancient Greek theological debate. And it's also, I mean, the language here about the wheel of change turning and whatnot. I mean, that also anticipates Boethius's use of it as a wheel of fortune. And so there is this sense in which this is willed by Zeus, and so it's willed about there where what is willed is law. And Juno struggles in vain against it, but in vain in an ultimate sense. But of course, she can do a lot of damage along the way, and she does. She can cause a lot of suffering along the way, and she does. And she does manage to win for Carthage a really, really lofty destiny, in that they were the city that almost took down Rome.
She is a model of divine interference.
Yeah.
That is very different from, I think, a Boethian classical theist, but even I think what he's doing with Jove in this work, she tries, she gets a little bit of concessions here and there, but it's still Jove's plan.
This is really important because this is relevant to another change that the Romans made to the Greek mythology that's evident in this text. They changed Venus's status. She got demoted because she is Zeus's aunt in the Greek mythology. She came out of Uranus's severed member when it was thrown into the sea. But in Roman mythology, which is clear in this text, she's his daughter. And so she becomes, instead of being older than Hera and then Juno and whatnot, and Athena and that company, the Olympian gods, right? And so in the Greek conception, love, which is what she represents, is not an Olympic reality. It is a chthonic reality, which is to say, it doesn't belong to the gods of reason. It belongs to the gods of passion. Those deeper forces that lie down in what we would call the subconscious in the contemporary world. And it its power is therefore to be reckoned differently than the Olympian power. It's not doesn't necessarily mean that Aphrodite is stronger than Zeus, but her power is of a different sort of Zeus, and so Zeus comes under her power in a way that the other gods don't, which is why Hera is able to use Aphrodite's girdle to put Zeus to sleep in the Iliad. So here she's been domesticated to where love is just part of all the things that are under Jupiter, and I think that that's the same type of movement with fate as well. So everything is being put under Jupiter. He's really becoming omnipotent in a way that Zeus wasn't. And what that means is that divine interference is no longer a good descriptor for what Jupiter does. It's a good descriptor for what other gods do. And Jupiter's is the plan against which they all interfere.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very interesting take on Greek theology. It's settling a whole bunch of theological questions that were at issue and that were being debated hotly in the epic literature on the Greek side, and the Romans come down very much on the side of no. There is, Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, the best and the greatest, and historically that makes Jupiter a better precursor for the Christian god than Zeus. And so it's a movement in the direction of a conception of the divine that's going to be more like what Christians are going to take advantage of when it's their turn. And so you see Deus Optimus Maximus on Christian churches in Rome, which is a direct taking over of the Jupiter Opus Maximus.
Yeah, that's great. I think one thing you wanted to talk about had to do with Aeneas's piety, right? And some of the stuff that he how the Latin maybe plays into that.
Yeah, because one of the things that I felt when I first was reading this, especially that great moment when he, the sort of the Batman moment. If you guys remember the first Michael Keaton Batman, he's out there beating up criminals, and this one guy's like, "Who are you?" And he goes, "I'm Batman." That great mic drop of a line. Well, Aeneas has that moment too. We're like, "Who are you?" And he says, "Sum pius Aeneas, my fama mihi nota super itera." I am pious Aeneas. My fame is noted above the heavens. And as I was reading that, pretty much every time when I'm reading that, maybe not this time, I get there and I'm like, really? Pious? Like that's the word you're going with? I could think of a lot of words that would describe you and that would speak to your excellence, but pious isn't the first one that comes to mind. But the reason for that is because I bring to the word pious all of these contemporary notions of piety. I think about the Blessed Virgin Mary and things like this, and that is not at all what we have in mind here. And so the piety he's referring to, it's referred to a few very specific moments. It's especially above all how he treats his father.
Yeah.
The duty he shows to his father, which is the Roman word for that is piety. And that's because pius describes both the devotion due from an inferior to a superior, as well as the condescension of the superior to the inferior for the good of the inferior. And so it's one of these words that describes the reciprocal relationship and not simply one side or the other of the relationship, much in the same way that in Latin, hospes refers to both the host and the guest. That one word names both of them because they're reciprocally related around the one notion of hospitality. So it is the way he treats his father and the care he has for his father, but it's also there's lots of mentions of them, and it's easy to not notice it very much. But he's got the Trojan gods. He's carrying the Trojan gods with him, and they're explicitly called penates by Virgil. And so these are the Roman household gods that you would have little altars for in every house. So taken together, Anchises and the Trojan gods represent the vares and penates of Roman religion. That is to say, the ancestors who are buried in the house and whose spirits watch over the family, and then also these household gods, which are the ancient religion of the Italic peoples before they stole Greek mythology and appropriated Greek mythology and made it their own. So this is piety in a really significant sense, But in order to understand it as piety, we have to take seriously that the divine status, not just of the Olympian gods, but also of ancestors and of these household gods.
So 2 episodes I wanted to bring up about his piety, because you're right, especially in relation to his father, he's depicted as very pious. I mean, the part that really got me on this read was when he carries his father out of Troy as the city is being destroyed, and you think, man, what a great son he is. The way that he goes and gives his father funeral games when they have the opportunity, the way he goes to the underworld to see his father. I mean, all speaks to his dedication and his piety. But of course, you know, that piety is supposed to be exhibited through obedience to the gods as well. And so there are kind of 2 places where he seems to get distracted or pulled away from piety. So the first is with Dido. The gods have to say, hey, you need to get back on track. And he does, to his credit. He leaves the city and everything. Not before he makes a huge mess of it all, but still, he does get back. But then the very ending of the book, I mean, when he's fighting with Turnus, and there's that moment where Turnus is saying, you know, okay, go ahead and kill me, but, you know, make sure to stop going down this road of hatred. And it almost kind of works for him, but then you get the idea that he sees the belt of Pallas, his friend, and he can't help but go down the road of rage. Which, I mean, on the one hand, it's certainly true. I don't think the Greeks or the Romans would care that he kills his enemy there on the battlefield. And even Turnus is kind of like, yeah, you got to do it. It's that not giving into the anger part that seems to be a little bit questionable, I suppose. I don't know. What do you make of that?
It has always been a very troubling end to me. It's very ambiguous in the sense of it. It leaves me feeling unsettled, and it doesn't feel like a virtuous act on Aeneas's part. I'm not saying it's a vicious act, but it just feels disordered. You know, the Romans, their number one philosophy is stoicism, right? And it doesn't really line up with that. It feels like Achilles. You know, it's the Iliad. The first word of the Iliad is rage. That's what he sings of, right? And it seems like we're back in that spot, which is actually, wow, how have I never thought of this before? It's the perfect place for it to end, because if we're doing the Iliad backwards, then the last word of the Aeneid needs to be, you know, the first word of the Iliad. I wonder if the last word in Latin is actually can't be, because it's like the underworld or something. But yeah, it's never stood. Umbras, shadows, is the last word of Latin. It has never sat well with me as a way of ending it. It felt like, you know, if you're telling the story of this is who we are, this is our guy, and so you can't understand us without understanding his story, and his story ends in denying. Well, it's not exactly denying the plea for mercy, because the mercy is, like you said, is not don't kill me. It's, you know, be like Achilles and return my body to my father. And we don't know whether he does that or not, but it does feel as if there's a moment of humanity between Aeneas and Turnus at the end here, and that Aeneas's humanity is activated and they're making a real connection. And then he sees the token of vengeance, and that goes away, and he retreats back into a kind of animal rage. So I've never liked that much, but you brought it up in the context of piety, and that may be a helpful way to think about it, because he while Pallas is not not one of his ancestors, he is going to become a member of his family eventually. And there is this sense of obligation, or what you owe to him, to the memory of him, to his shade. And so it could be seen as a pious act, where the piety is offered to the shade of Pallas to bring vengeance and placate his own sense of injustice down there in the underworld.
Interesting. I hadn't considered that. I guess I was considering his obligation to the gods and the warning that he not go down that road of hatred. Like you said, if we're thinking of this from a Roman frame, seems like a very reasonable, you know, stoic way of speaking, and he almost explicitly rejects it.
Yeah.
And that's where it seems to be in danger, at least. I mean, because like you said, we don't know what happens. I mean, maybe he does return the body, maybe he does get his humanity back, but we don't know. And to end it like that, it seems like almost, again, that kind of distraction from what you're supposed to be, getting kind of lost in a way.
And on that point, I mean, let's bring another controversial passage onto the table with this then, and that is leaving the underworld through the gate of ivory, which is the gate of false dreams, or the gate of, it's the gate of false spirits, perhaps. And no one knows what this means. It is probably the single most hotly debated interpretive question in the Aeneid. But several of the interpretations revolve around the possibility that this great epic in praise of the new regime is painting the regime as having some cracks in it. Is saying that the Roman legacy is not all sunshine and unicorns. It's not all aqueducts and level roads, right? I mean, there's a whole lot of crucifixes as well. And so it could be, if you want to take that reading of the Gate of Ivory, then that means that this at the end would be potentially another instance of that. There are some serious questions about moderation right at the heart of who we are as Romans. And I have to say, I'm attracted to that reading simply because Virgil is such a perceptive and subtle poet that the idea of him as just full bore on board with Caesar Augustus and seeing no problems in this whatsoever is unattractive. It seems unlikely that he wouldn't have a feel for that. And it's ironic that the Romans, whose major philosophy is Stoicism, are really not Stoic in terms of how they live their lives. I mean, if you think about, the Romans are famed for their luxury and their excess, both in war and in pleasure. And so it may be that we're seeing instantiated, embodied in Aeneas, the struggle that Virgil would diagnose as going on in the Roman soul itself.
Yeah. Or at the very least, it seems to me like he would be picking up on some things that are endemic to just the idea of empire, right? I mean, every empire has a foundation of violence, and that violence has to be continual and perpetual and narrative. It has to be based on a narrative, right? The Pax Romana makes sense once you subjugated and continue to subjugate all of those forces that you perceive as threats. The same thing could be said of their relationship with Carthage, right? They're sort of the other that always has to be focused on as a way of consolidating one's own identity. You have to sort of define yourself against the other. And so anyway, not just in this last part, but I actually think that works its way through the story, that you see that empire comes at a really great cost. Both socially and politically, but also even personally. I mean, Aeneas loses a number of close friends, especially Pallas, but more than just him, throughout the story in his quest to found the Roman people.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you can sort of put a number on the cost. $850 billion. That's the American defense budget for 2025. $850 billion. And we're not at war with anybody, right? The Pax Americana is going great. And look at all the resources that have to be put into defense in order that there may be a Pax Americana. And, of course, there are places in the world you could go, and if you talked about a Pax Americana, they would laugh and possibly kill you, because that's not been their experience, right? And I think that's the truth of empires. The British Empire, the American Empire, whatever one you want to point to, you're right. Empires are always built on a foundation of violence and blood, and they can only continue in existence under that because the subjected peoples have to be kept down. They have to be kept subjugated. And people will go on having these dreams of being independent and having, controlling their own destiny and governing themselves, the fools. And so they will need to be reminded over and over again where the real power lies.
What would you think to the, because I think you're exactly right, but that perhaps one difference though is that in a book like this, the Romans are sort of owning it. They're pretty open about their hatred of the Carthaginians, and they're kind of defining themselves over and against others. I mean, even their word, barbarous is foreigner. It's not just a barbarian. It's just someone who's not Roman. Whereas as Americans, I think in a modern context, and I think even maybe the British did this to some degree too, we like to kind of tell ourselves that really we haven't done that. That really we're actually sort of, we're the good guys, and we don't do that to people, Maybe they misunderstand us or they misinterpret something, but we don't really own it, I guess. We like to sanitize it maybe a little more in our time.
Yeah, it was a friend of mine who lives in Washington D.C. was at maybe she was in Boston or something on a tour, and they were talking about the American Revolution and saying, how we rose up against taxation without representation, and being this, core American value that we don't do that to other people. That's what the British did to us. And she says, well, I live in Washington, D.C., where the license plate says taxation without representation. And then someone else in the audience is like, well, I'm from Guam. We're a U.S. territory that is not allowed to be a state or have representatives, but we pay taxes, that sort of a thing. And so there, you can ask the question, how true is that story we tell ourselves? And there is no, whatever you think about that, whether you think that, America should be called an empire or not, whether you think that we do those types of things or not, there can be no question that the Romans did those things. And what you don't see in them is the anxiety about it that is present with Americans. I can imagine, I know a number of people who listening to this would be frustrated with me for saying these things, because they'd be like, that's not who America is. We are the good guys. We're not an empire. And that's a conversation we can have, and we can, perhaps they're right. But the fact that they would push back against someone saying that indicates that there's a desire not to be seen that way. There's a kind of anxiety about not being just another imperial oppressor. The Romans don't have any of that. They're perfectly fine with being imperial oppressors. And look what it enables. It enables them, and this is not me praising being an imperial oppressor, by the way. It enables them to depict Carthage as being really noble and beautiful. It's a lovely place, and Aeneas is jealous, and he sees it and he says, oh, happy people whose walls are already laid, right? They don't have to villainize Carthage, because their right to put Carthage down isn't based upon a claim that we're morally better than them.
Right.
It's just God's will. Somebody's got to have authority, and it's meant to be us, and sorry, Carthage, you got to be destroyed. That's just the way it's going to be. Right. It's almost beautiful in the innocence of its savagery.
Well, and I think the difference between us and maybe parts of the British colonial reign are that we have a Christian conscience, whereas the Romans just don't. And so what you see in our cognitive dissonance sometimes when we talk about the issue of empire, I think is one of the problems that comes when you try to baptize certain conceptions of power. Like, it makes sense in a pagan world that's how things would operate, and it is what it is. I mean, obviously I would rather not live in that world, but I get it. Whereas once you introduce a kind of Christian mind into these issues, you can do certain things with it, and this isn't the place to hash out all political theology and all that, but there are people who would say, well, no, it has to be this way still, but we're doing this in a kind of Christian way, and then you do get a kind of anxiety about it because it feels wrong, but we're still doing it, and so you have to wrestle with that tension in a way that I think the pagans just didn't need to. I think that is a good thing for us, because it reminds us we're human.
Right.
I'm glad we wrestle with that. We should.
Yeah, we can pull back from some of the problematic violence, because we have the potential of seeing it as problematic and of questioning, okay, is this a good means for achieving the end that we believe that we're called to achieve? Jove doesn't judge any of Aeneas's actions. He doesn't be like, I can't believe you slept with Dido. He's just like, his only concern is get out of there, right? As long as the city gets founded, I'm good. It reminds me very much of in Norse mythology, Odin receives the prophecy of Ragnarok, and it's the end of the world and the death of the gods. And in the prophecy, it says that will be the end of all things, unless, if the world's chosen be found, seed of Odin, slayer of dragons, to be among the warriors of Valhalla, then the world can begin anew. And it's a very ambiguous prophecy. Does it mean that the gods don't have to die, or does it mean just that, the gods will die, but there'll be a new beginning after that? As it works out, that's what it means, is that the old gods die, and then the elder god returns and creates the world anew, and that's becomes the Christian version of the story. The Garden of Eden in Christianized Norse mythology follows after Ragnarok. But what's interesting about it is Odin then goes out and he goes philandering like Zeus, but he's not doing it because he's just an old lech. He's doing it because he needs to sire the world's chosen seed of Odin. And so he's just spreading his seed abroad among mortal women so that that person can come into existence. And when that person comes into existence, it gets tied up. Siegfried gets tied up into the story of the Rheingold, which is this ransom that Loki and Odin have to pay in exchange for their freedom. And Odin sends Loki to get the ransom. And Loki's like, you know who I am, right? Like, everything I do goes sideways. And if I do this, it's going to have dire consequences for Odin's seed, for the world's chosen. Right? Like it's basically going to lead to the death of Siegfried. And Odin says, I don't care about that. I'm playing the long game. The prophecy says he's got to come back from Valhalla, so he's got to die anyway. So how he dies isn't my problem, so long as he qualifies for the prophecy at the end of the day. That's a long excursion, but I feel like that's kind of like what Jupiter's doing here is, listen, I don't care what the guy does, so long as Rome gets founded, I've got what I need.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
and I think that's very Roman too.
That raised another question for me, actually, while you were talking. Were Dido and Aeneas married?
Yes, I love this question, right? Because it looks, from a superficial reading of the text, it can look like it depends on who you ask.
Yep.
Because Dido uses the word marriage for their first night in the cave, and Aeneas, when she pushes him on it later, says, I never married you. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
That wasn't a marriage, right?
Real convenient, Aeneas. Yeah.
Right, it really is. But the law is on Dido's side. And by the law, I mean what the gods have done. Because it's very cool. Juno is the goddess of marriage. And so when she puts them together and she sets marriage torches out and has nymphs singing the marriage song and everything like that, like, there is no clearer sign that it's a marriage than for the goddess Juno to be presiding over it. And the torch is the thing that makes the marriage legal, right? Like, this is in Roman culture. This is the thing that it does. And so to a Roman reader, there's zero doubt that this is a wedding. They are definitely married. And so it's very weird that Aeneas can be like, oh, I never used that word. Like, let's not label it. I mean, we were just having fun, right? The Roman's like, mm-hmm. So that's another interesting bit where he's portrayed. To me, that feels like a negative portrayal of Aeneas.
He's kind of cowardly in the way he handles that.
Yeah, he just lies, he's just trying to pretend like that's not a marriage. Virgil is very comfortable giving Carthage a lot of moral high ground in this conflict. Now, of course, maybe he can do that because Carthage has been destroyed by the time he's writing this, and so that serpent has no teeth for the present. But that is a major problem, and it is a point of, if he weren't being commanded by Jupiter to sail away from Carthage, that would be a major point of impiety, because he would be sinning. He does sin against Juno in doing that. And so it's not just now. Originally, it was, I hate him because he's going to found Rome and they're going to destroy my city. But now it's also, he has slighted me and my domain as a goddess, and said that that's not important. And he's said that it's not real. He's lied about it again.
Yeah. That whole incident is a fascinating one. I mean, on the one hand, it's not Dido's fault because she is under the influence of divine interference.
Yep.
But it does, I guess, highlight kind of a bigger phenomenon, the idea that a person can be kind of derailed based on their pursuit of love. Aeneas certainly has a very clear calling, and yet he kind of forgets himself during that time.
Mhm.
So yeah, very interesting. It's kind of sad story.
It is, yeah, and the image of when Cupid pretends to be Ascanius, who is like a toddler at this point, or maybe a little older than a toddler, but young enough that you would dangle him on your knee and play with him, and so he's on Dido's knee, and she's like holding him to her breast and everything, and you're looking, and the poet sets the scene for us to where we see that she thinks she's got a little boy, but she's actually holding the god, and one of the most capricious and dangerous gods there is. And this, she's just fondling danger on her lap, and it's this really powerful image of the danger of giving yourself over to desire, of promoting and fomenting desire within yourself like that. It's striking, really, really well done. And yeah, there's a lot of Virgil. One of the reasons I think why Virgil has been a bestseller for 2,000 years is because he is wonderfully subtle. It's not all black and white. It's not this or that. But does Aeneas conquer because he's so virtuous? No, he doesn't. Does it mean he's not virtuous? No, it doesn't. So he's super virtuous? I wouldn't say that.
Yeah. Huh.
I wonder, I do wonder if this poem could have been written any earlier in Roman history, because there's a kind of supreme confidence, self-confidence in yourself as a people that has to be there to be able to write this epic.
Which is interesting though, because I mean, by the time you get to Augustus, I mean, I suppose he's put down the opponents in the various civil wars that followed the assassination of Caesar, but I don't know, just living in such a monumental shift from the Republic to the Empire, like, it seems I would be riddled with anxiety about that. I wouldn't feel supremely confident in anything. This concept hasn't been proven yet. We've just started it, and we're writing a whole epic poem about it.
And not only that, but just a few short years before the civil war between Antony and Octavius, there was the civil war between Caesar and Pompey.
Well, right,
and
right.
And there was a civil war 30 years before that. I mean, they've had a series of civil wars that have rocked the late Republic, leading to the Empire. This is interesting, though. I mean, you're right that just looking back on the history of, like, within your lifetime, if you're living under Augustus, you could think, who are we?
Yeah.
What's going on, right? But what if you buy into it? And this is the flip side of it, right? We've mentioned Virgil as potentially, seeing some problems in this new direction. But what if you, nevertheless, in spite of all that, you buy into Caesar Augustus? Octavius was an unbelievably charismatic young man. And when you add to that the laurels of empire, it's a very compelling vision. And so you think, yeah, he's not perfect, but under him, there's no limit to what we can do or who we can be. And all of this stuff, I think it's, again, brilliant. I just keep saying that because, readers, this text is brilliant. The choice of, I'm going to tell the story of a guy who is way back. It's not even like it's not even Romulus, right? It's not the founder of Rome. It's the guy who's got to go down a few generations before we even get to Romulus. By telling that story and then by keying it to all the things that are going to happen, this man literally carries on his body the future of his people, because his shield has Roman history written on it, which hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
His whole shield is a prophecy, right? That by doing that, it in a way says, guys, as you look back on all these things that happen, you look back on Actium, he's got the Battle of Actium on his shield. That's when Augustus defeats Mark Antony definitively and gains sole control. By putting those things in the future of this man struggling in the past, it's a way of saying, it's okay. It's okay that those things are in our past, because if you step back and look at them as a part of a large tapestry, this is just the fire in which the Roman soul is forged. And this whole text is teleologically pointed at Caesar Augustus, and therefore it prompts the question, so now that we've fulfilled all the promises made to Virgil, our Abraham, now that all of those things have become real and become instantiated in Caesar Augustus, what are we going to do with it? And that's where the repeated, multiple times Jupiter lets clear the Romans are going to seize authority so that they can bring peace and law to the world. And, is there any price too high to pay for peace and law? Probably not if you're a Roman. And so it puts all of that stuff you've just gone through, all of the stories of wars your father and grandfather can tell you, it puts them all into a positive light and allows you to own it and say, yeah, this is, hang on, this is the line right at the beginning. It's exactly what we need for this. In book 1, thinking about all of Roman history, you can say, well, the circulation doesn't do it very well, but so difficult it was to found a city and bring home his gods, right? These bitches, sleepless rage, cruel losses, and war, and all this other kind of stuff. Yeah, all of those things. That's the cost of founding a city and bringing the gods home.
Wow. Yep. Brilliant's a good word for it.
I have to confess, partly I'm paying a debt that I owe to Virgil here because I've not always spoken of Virgil as highly as I ought. And the reason for that is really not in any way Virgil's fault. There was a point when I got annoyed at how much people like the Aeneid, especially because of other stuff that gets short shrift because of the Aeneid devotion. And so in the foolish way of youth, I had attempted to correct that by talking down about the Aeneid a little bit and kind of denigrating it a little, and that's not warranted, and that's not the way to go about that. The Aeneid deserves its place as one of the greatest epics of all time, and it probably is the third greatest epic of the ancient world. I can't say for sure that it is, but it probably is, and that's okay.
I would really like to see it. Christopher Nolan's doing the Odyssey, which I feel like when that does come out, we'll have to do an episode just on the movie and all that, because I think it's going to be really good. But as I was reading it this time, I was really struck by how sort of cinematic it was.
Yes.
Almost more so than the Odyssey or the Iliad in some ways. I thought I could actually kind of see how you would do this on a big screen as it was happening, which makes me sad, because I feel like by the time we get through the Odyssey being made, they're going to do the Iliad again, probably, because Troy was the last adaptation of that, so it'll almost have been like 20 years by that point. And so they'll go back to the Iliad. So the Aeneid's just going to be overlooked in all this, but I would love to see a movie of it, because it really reads like a movie in a way.
It does. Well, and so that's a great segue into our new venture here at the Classical Mind. Listeners, we'll be launching a Kickstarter project to fund the Classical Mind cinematic
universe.
Classical Mind cinematic universe. Yeah, that's right. We'll take all the great books and make movies out of them.
All of the same world. Yeah, no, that would be if anybody wants some consultants on the Aeneid film, Junius is probably much more valuable than me, but I would be happy to tag along.
Hit us up, man. We are available. Our calendars are clear. Readers, this is an amazing work. It's so good, and it's not just it's not just brutal. I mean, it's got some brutality and whatnot in it, which you have to have in epics. I mean, it's not an epic poem if you don't have there's a certain number of chopped off body parts that have to be there for it to count as epic. But it's amazing actually how little of that really there is. So much of this is just so tender in the sense of home. The women burning the ships. Juno goes down and makes them frenzied. But sometimes you have to just step aside from the divine interference stuff and look at what it feels like from the human standpoint. And these are just women who they didn't sign up to wander the whole world. They were fleeing Troy, and they heard through the grapevine that Aeneas had people mustering for an escape flotilla, and they went there. And so he shows up to meet his small group of people that he's leaving the city with, and there's a whole flock of Trojans who have heard about it and gone there to sign on. But they weren't trying to sign on to found a new empire or anything like that. They're just looking for home. That's what the Odyssey's about. It's about going home, and they're just trying to get home. And they're like, this is a good place. Why can't we just stay here? Right? We keep passing all these Trojans who've done well for themselves. Why can't we just join one of their cities? Wouldn't that be nice?
Those are the older women too, right?
Yeah.
So
And
you
so
get
there's a
that
lot of,
you get that
you know,
feeling of like, they want to settle, they want to be
yeah,
done. Yeah, yeah,
they have a right. The nesting instinct is strong. But this is, and I think that what the part of the greatness of this text is that Virgil gets it. He gets them.
Mhm.
And he treats so many of these people so tenderly. I mean, few people have been treated more tenderly in epic poetry than Dido.
Yeah.
To such an extent that Saint Augustine's weeping over Dido's death because it's just so powerful and so moving, and it is. And so yeah, you can come for the blood and the guts and the hacked off body parts, but stay for, just like with Homer, same thing in Homer. The part of the genius of the epic poet is not just about being able to tell the big battle moments. It's about being able to see the human soul clearly and well. And Virgil has that in spades.
Absolutely. And maybe now we can preview a little bit, which is that, of course, without Virgil, we wouldn't have the Divine Comedy by Dante. I mean, it's amazing just how I taught through the Divine Comedy last year. And so to read this again this year,
so many illusions.
I mean, even just the description of the underworld, you can see kind of where Dante is coming from with all that. And so we're excited because we're going to do the Divine Comedy next season. I think it's like February to April. Each month we'll do one of the 3 entries in the comedy. And so that'll be kind of cool because we'll have this under our belts to be able to refer back to. So I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, one of the things I was noticing as we were talking in this conversation, and this is just something to call out for listeners, especially as new listeners come on who maybe have not heard past episodes or many past episodes. I'm noticing that the further we go, the more old books that we've done before keep coming back up again, because we not just have them in our own past, but now have this shared conversation over these as well. And so all of those episodes remain accessible, and so listeners, as we refer back to something, you might have to loop back around and listen back to that conversation again. But also, I know lots of the listeners are reading these books along with us, not just listening because they have read them, but are actively reading them with us. And what's really cool about that is that you're now part of this conversation as well, that you can look back on your own memory of reading whatever crazy book we just mentioned and enjoying that. So it's a bit of it's becoming more of an inside conversation as it goes along, but at the same token, it's, I think, really well modeling what it's like to read the great books and to be reading people who are reading each other and following and thinking along with them.
Yeah, no, I think that's really cool, and it's taken a while to get to that point, but it's definitely something that I think we wanted from the very beginning, is to have that sort of atmosphere of constantly going back and forth and looking, where have we read that, or where will we read that? And it's wonderful and beautiful, and it's so cool to see how really writing and reading is just a conversation that has unfolded over a long period of time, and will continue to unfold long after we're gone as well. But it's fun to play a part in that. So, well, Junius, should we go ahead and begin to close out a little bit with our
Endnotes?
Endnotes.
Yes,
sorry,
we should.
I've been thinking about footnotes and how much better they are than Endnotes, but you're right, these are Endnotes.
So much better than Endnotes, but we're not going to sprinkle these throughout the podcast. They all come at the end. Right. Yeah. So what do you got?
Well, so I struggled with this, to be honest. At first, I thought I'll just say the Divine Comedy, but I felt like that was cheating. I just didn't think that was right. So I'm gonna go with a song called "White Flag" by the singer Dido. I don't think it really has a whole lot to do with the book, other than that her performing name was Dido, but I like the song, and so I'll put it in the show notes, and you can go listen to that.
Yeah. You can almost just say like every book written after this. There's so many literary contexts, but I'm gonna say two things. I'll do a song too, since you've done it, and I'll also give a nod to Dido. Dido's Lament from Purcell's opera, Dido and Aeneas. It's "When I Am Laid in Earth." It's a very sad dirge. It's what she sings as she's about to cast herself on the pyre, and it's a powerful song. I've used it as an example in teaching music classically before. In fact, I think you might even be able to find a recording of me talking about it at the Greenheart's Symposium in Phoenix. But really, really beautiful, powerful way to bring to light the what she's feeling in that moment. And then the other thing I'm going to say is another epic poem. Like if you've been reading this and you enjoyed it because you enjoyed the epic poetry, and you're interested in looking for another Latin epic poem to read, then you should read Statius. Statius is also very, very important for Dante. He takes over from Virgil, and there's loads and loads of references of Statius in the Divine Comedy. In fact, we should do an episode on the Thebaid at some point. But that is what I'd recommend, is reading Statius's Thebaid, which is, having just read it, and so I've read it and the Aeneid in very close proximity to each other. I will say the Aeneid is better, but it's not a lot better. It's clearly better, but not a lot better. The Thebaid is unbelievably good. And so, and it's got some of the best deaths in all of epic poetry. So that would be my other recommendation.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, this has been fun. I know we could probably talk about this book for quite a long time, but unfortunately, our listeners' patience is only finite. So we'll have to end it here. But our next book, I'm very excited about, a little bit of a shift from epic poetry and ancient literature to Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And so I think that'll be a lot of fun to talk about. So we will see you all next month, listeners. And in the meantime, keep reading.